The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Health and Safety Executive Waste and Recycling Inspection Campaign, a snapshot of health and safety in the sector's webinar. I'm Kim Mynard, the Senior Technical Officer at CIWM and your host for today's webinar. I would like to point out that although your microphones are muted, you are still able to ask questions by typing these into the question box on the bottom of the grey dashboard on your screen. You are encouraged to do this at any point throughout the webinar, and your questions are not public, they can only be seen by the organisers. If you lose your grey dashboard at any point, there is a small orange arrow at the top left corner of the dashboard that will show and hide it. If you manage to minimise or lose your webinar presentation screen, click on the blue flower on the taskbar at the bottom of your monitor to make it reappear. The session is being recorded and a link to this will be shared with you via email as soon as possible after the webinar has ended, so don't worry about trying to take lots of notes, as you will also be able to revisit the slides as well as hear the presentation at your leisure. Audience questions will be asked after each presentation during the webinar. This will give you a chance to type them into the question box as you think of them, but we ask that you submit typed answers throughout rather than waiting at the end so that we can group questions into relevant topics and to avoid duplication. We'll try to answer as many questions as the time allows, but we may not be able to get through them all depending on how many questions we're asked. Throughout the webinar, you'll be asked for your opinions in the form of questions and multiple choice polls. When a question comes up on your screen, you'll have approximately 30 to 40 seconds to tick the answer you want to make and then click submit. We'll then go through the answers on those panels as well. You will see on your grey panel there are a number of handouts that will be referred to during the webinar. You may want to open these now before the presentations start. If after this webinar, if anyone feels they need more detailed information on the webinar topic or other relevant subjects, we'll be happy to provide you with further details if you want to contact us at CIWM by email. At the end of the webinar, a very brief multiple choice survey will pop up when you log out. Please take a couple of minutes to tell us what you think. Your views are very important to us. Remember, this is an audience participation webinar and your typed questions are welcome throughout. I'm now going to hand you over to Toni Gladding. Toni is Secretary of the Waste Industry Safety and Health Forum, otherwise known as WISH. She is also Chair of the CIWM Health and Safety Special Interest Group and a Senior Lecturer at the Open University. So there you are, Toni, over to you now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you will find this very interesting presentation. Certainly looks very interesting from where I'm sitting. You will see that there's a poll open. We've got a question for you before we start the presentation. If you can just take a second to have a vote, and then we'll move on with the rest of the discussion. And just at this point, I'd just like to apologise if you can hear a lawnmower because they've decided to cut the grass out my window at the exact same time as we're doing this, so apologies for that.
So who do you think is responsible for health and safety in your workplace? Though the answers you could choose are: the nominated health and safety officer is solely responsible, the MD or CEO or waste management team are responsible, your line manager, team leader or supervisor is responsible, the health and safety committee are jointly responsible, or everyone in the workplace is responsible. And I can see that everyone has responded there, and we've got a 100% response there as well, so that's pretty good. So Toni, what do you think to that?
Yeah, it's good. It's better than I thought it was going to be. Well done, everyone. Okay, so we'll move on to the rest of the content now. I'm going to spend a little time talking about WISH, which is the Waste Industry Safety and Health Forum, and the CIWM Health and Safety Special Interest Group. The reason for this is because obviously they're some of the major industry activity, if you like, in health and safety, because let's face it, the waste industry does have a little bit of a problem. So in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about where the industry was and is, and sad to say, I think that the health and safety stats have not shown quite the improvement that we would have liked. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what working groups that WISH have, and also about how we involve the industry and how we engage with other stakeholders such as HSE and industry bodies. I'm also going to talk a little bit about WISH guidance, where you can find it and how you can contribute, and the WISH website. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of the CIWM Special Interest Group, which we launched in 2017. The group's actually very active with the WISH steering group. But we also do some other things. We support the Peoples and Bins initiative, because unfortunately there still are a number of fatalities every year with people climbing into wheeled bins. We liaise with international bodies such as ISWA, because unsurprisingly, waste management hasn't got a great reputation in other countries, not just this country. And even as late as last year, the states realised that they were killing on average 1 person per week in the United States through waste management activities. So actually WISH, the CIWM Special Interest Group, the involvement in the HSE, this is all world leading stuff. We are ahead of most of the European Union, funnily enough, in our activity in health and safety and waste management. Okay, so why WISH? Well, I think it's pretty obvious to everyone. We've got a very busy and active waste management industry, which has changed a lot in the last 20 years. In the 90s, we were sending 80–90% of our materials to landfill, and today that's probably less than 10%. We're doing more materials recycling, mechanical biological treatment, anaerobic digestion, etc., etc. So we have a lot of new technology. A lot of the waste that was previously enclosed in bins and sent straight to landfill, we now deal with in a much more close, if you like, fashion. But what has really changed? The fact is, the injuries that we're seeing in the waste industry and the fatalities that we're seeing in the waste industry are the same old thing, which is a bit of a shame. It's being struck by vehicles. It is contact with machinery, with balers, with conveyor belts, injuries such as slips, trips and falls. Sian, I know, will probably go into more detail into the actual figures, but the point I really wanted to get across is, even though the industry has changed, the reasons for health and safety injuries and accidents has not changed. What might have changed slightly is there is more potential for health impacts, because obviously we're bringing people into closer contact with various types of waste. So there's more, if you like, interest nowadays on things such as bioaerosols and air quality and the health of workers. But actually, you know, the things have not much change in the outcomes. So how are we doing that? Well, with WISH, we are trying our best to look at some best practice guidance notes, and we'll go into those in more detail in a moment. You will see in your handouts, which you've got 5 provided, if you look on the pane on the right hand side, there will be a list of Waste Industry Safety and Health Forum guidance. At the moment we have around 19 guidance documents, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. Okay. This is just to remind you that we have a website, and the WISH website, well, we still have WISH pages on HSE, and there is still a hse.gov.uk/waste. Will still get you an awful lot of information. However, WISH now has its own site, which is supported by CIWM. And you can see the address on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, which is wishforum.org.uk. And on that, you will find everything about WISH Forum, about the guidance, about any other resources we have, how to join, and how to join working groups, which I will go into a bit more now. WISH is obviously supported by HSE. We've got the fire service involved, various industry bodies. So it's quite a big initiative, and it has been going for, well, since at least the early 2000s, but every 2 to 3 years we revamp what we are doing and where we are going, and I'm just going to go into that a little bit more in a moment. First, I'm going to just spend a moment or two talking about guidance. We had, like I mentioned earlier, we have 19 guidance documents active at the moment, but the guidance is not static. It is revised at regular intervals, and it is written for operators by operators. So we have various large companies, small companies, local authorities, HSE, industry bodies, all are consulted and who contribute to various types of guidance. And if you look on the right hand side of this slide, we've got 3 examples of some current guidance, one of which is Waste 28, which is the fire risk at waste management sites. I think it's worth saying that this is an industry-led document funded entirely by the waste management industry, and it has done a huge amount of scientific testing, underpins that particular document, and it's so popular now that it's being used in as far away as Australia and throughout Europe, because it is a world leader. So we're very pleased and proud of the fire risk documentation. But that's not the only thing we do. There are, like I said, 19 documents. We've got various things from everything from skip and container safety to safe waste and collection services, handling offensive and hygiene waste safely. There's a whole list of those documents on the WISH website. There's some important points to make about the guidance. It's the best practice, not the lowest common denominator. It may go above and beyond your compliant practice. In other words, in some cases it's more than you need legally, if you like to put it like that. We've got hints, tips, advice and case studies, and they are not static. For instance, the health and safety training and waste management recycling is undergoing review as we speak, so they do get reviewed quite regularly. So at this point, you may be wondering about the working groups. Well, from the 1st of March, we revitalised our working groups of 2017. And we basically now have 5 groups that people can get involved in. When I say people, I mean everyone who's listening in on the webinar, or anyone you might think might be interested. They are designed so that they would take volunteers, anybody who'd like to contribute. And if I just discuss just very briefly what those groups do, leadership and worker engagement is looking at exactly what it says on the tin. It's looking at how workers can be more engaged in health and safety. Building competence does look at things like training, but also wider competence issues. Customising support for SMEs is specifically looking at the small and medium-sized enterprises, because we know that they are sometimes in need of more help and assistance. The Safer Workplaces group is looking at everything from container specs, machinery, safe cleansing, single man collections, lithium batteries, a whole range of subjects. And the Healthier Workplaces group is looking at everything from noise and glass in waste collection through to health surveillance, bioaerosols, and other such subjects. So there's a whole range of work and activities being undergone in WISH at the moment. So I'm just going to zip through this bit, because basically the whole point of WISH is to establish and share best practice, improve the safety performance of the industry, help develop competence, and improve the perception of the waste industry, which, you know, frankly has not been great in the last few years. And this is just, this little quote here is just something that Chris puts up. It is a hard job. We've got a lot to do, but we are, at least we're starting from a place where we are actively engaging with the industry and trying to provide good advice to everybody. This is not to forget the CIWM Health and Safety Special Interest Group. Basically, this group is for the members of CIWM, and we've got several things undergoing at the moment, including launching a personal responsibility for health and safety campaign later this year. Basically, we're going to be asking people about in their own individual commitment, if you like, to health and safety. So I do have a few questions and comments for you at the end before we move on to Sian. Just as an addendum, that little booklet to the right is available as a small physical booklet. It's not on the website, but if you would like a copy, then you can email info@wishforum.org.uk and we can send you some out. It's very good to give to the workers. It's designed for the guys on the ground. So I guess my only questions are, what would you like to see WISH do? What topics would you like to see us working on? And I've got a few questions for you about, well, you answered the first one very well about who's responsible for health and safety, but there are a few others there as well. So that concludes my part of the webinar.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Toni, for that. That's great. We've got a poll question now for the audience to answer. So have a look at this, and what would you like to see WISH tackle next? So please type your answer in the question box. So that's the question box where you've all been putting some questions for Toni there as well, which Toni, we've got some a few questions that have come in for you, so we'll answer those in a moment when people have had an opportunity to respond to the quick poll there. So if you'd like to see WISH tackle an issue, write your responses in your questions box down below there, and I can see there's quite a few coming in now, so that's great. Thank you very much. So we've got some questions from the audience for Toni, and the first one is how does WISH work with Health and Safety Executive to reduce accidents and incidents?
That's a very good question. Maybe Sian would like to also poke a nose in on this one. Basically, WISH obviously are on the steering, well, have HSE on their steering group, and we work together in trying to reduce those things. Do you want to add anything, Sian?
Yeah, it's just to say, as Toni said, HSE is a member of WISH. We sit on the steering committee, and we also input on all the working groups by finding the appropriate expert within HSE. So, for example, we currently have a working group with WISH looking at safety of and glove use in terms of suitability of testing and type of gloves. So we have a specialist from our science division who works exclusively with gloves, working with WISH to help produce that guidance.
Thank you very much, Sian. That's lovely. And also another question, how can CIWM's Health and Safety Special Interest Group influence health and safety in the industry?
That's a really good question. Well, I mean, there are many ways in which we can do this. Obviously, we engage with people like the regulator. We engage with the big companies. We engage with the smaller companies where we can. You know, there's no magic bullet for this. There's no overarching, very quick answer to solving, if you like, inverted commas, the waste industry's health and safety issues. It's for me personally, I think it's a case of influence and providing best practice and trying to bring people along with you and trying to engage them in the things that they need to be thinking about. That's my personal view.
We've got another question on something quite similar as well. What's your view on there being a wealth of documents and support being available? It is often not accessed and utilised, and therefore many accidents could have been prevented.
Well, that is one of our big worries, I think, is that we can spend a lot of time and provide some top-notch, you know, good quality documents for people to use, and you know, they either don't access them or they don't know they're available. In particular, we think this is an issue with SMEs who are often very busy and very pushed. Again, there's no magic bullet to that. The best we can do is to continue to raise our profile and our activity. It's, you know, it's a question of influence over longer term, I'm afraid, because there's no quick answer to that.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Toni. So we can put the guidance out there, but it's make sure that people use it.
Yeah, try and publicise it, make sure people know about it, yeah. But you know.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Thank you. That's all the questions we've got for Toni at the moment, but if there are any more that come through, we can probably perhaps do a few at the end if we have any time. So our second presentation is from Sian Clayton. Sian is a Principal Inspector at the Health and Safety Executive, and she leads the HSE Waste and Recycling Engagement and Policy team. Sian is a member of the Health and Safety Special Interest Group with CIWM and is an active member of the WISH Steering Committee. So over to you, Sian. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Good afternoon, everybody. And today I'm going to talk to you about feedback on HSE's campaign, which took place in the industry October to December last year, 2017. And that's me. So why a campaign? Well, it is a high-risk industry. There are too many injuries and too many deaths, and that just echoes really what Toni has just said, because there's no different picture, it's all the same picture. And now, sorry Kim, we have a question for the audience.
We have a question for you, audience. Were you aware of the Health and Safety Executive campaign before seeing today's webinar advertised? So it's one of two answers there, a yes or a no. I'll just give you a few seconds there to put your responses in. And there we are. So yes, there was majority of people were aware of the campaign before today's webinar. Was that surprised you, Sian?
No, that's really pleasing to hear, and I'll explain a bit later about why we're pleased and why we're glad that some of you actually were aware of it as we move on through the presentation. So going back to the points I made earlier, it is a high-risk industry, and it's a high-risk industry because of the last 5 years, 39 workers and 11 members of the public have been fatally injured. Every year, 5,000 workers suffer non-fatal injuries in the industry. And as Toni mentioned earlier, it's old injuries. There's nothing new. It's nothing to do with the new technology. We're still talking about slips, trips and falls, lifting and handling injuries, and people being struck or hit by objects. Similarly with health, every single year, 6,000 workers believe they suffered a work-related illness in the industry. MSD is the one that most people believe they've suffered with, stress, and then skin and respiratory diseases. And why do we say it's high risk? Well, 14 people were actually killed last year. But I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, how does that compare to other industries? I'm sure there's ones that are much worse than waste and recycling. Well, if you look at the number of fatals by industry for the 2016-17 year, Waste had 14 fatal injuries. Construction had 30, agriculture 27, and manufacturing 19. So what am I on about? Why do we keep saying waste is in a poor position? Well, that's all very well, but when you look at the rate of fatalities by industry, that is taken into account the number of people who work in each industry, and the injury rate is in terms of 100,000 workers employed. So construction might have had 30 deaths last year, but in terms of the number of people they employ, that's only a 1.37 rate, whereas waste has a rate of 12.69, which is far too high. We know there are risks, and they're not new. Transport, machinery, these are the two biggest causes of fatal injuries within the industry. And obviously there are issues with structural safety in terms of stockpiling, actual recycling and waste, and to physical structural buildings and walls within the premises. Health, Toni also mentioned, and while 6,000 people every year feel they do suffer from work-related injuries, it is indeed one of our key areas is looking at risks to occupational lung disease from exposure to asbestos, from exposure to RCF in catalytic converter decanning processes, and to bioaerosols. There are also risks from MSDs in the industry. As you've heard me say, it is the biggest cause of non-fatal injuries. And there is also risks from noise, especially in collection of recycled glass. Now, just because these are the key health and safety risks doesn't mean if an inspector comes to your site, they're going to go through all these topics. For example, some of the work HSE does is work with the manufacturers currently to try and redesign refuse collection vehicles to eliminate or reduce exposure to noise levels when glass is being collected, and also to redesign them from an ergonomics point of view for curbside sorting. So sometimes it's more about addressing the risk at source rather than passing it on to the end user. Now, Kim mentioned at the start there was handouts on the side for you to download. One of these is HSE Sector Plan for Health and Safety. HSE has 19 sector plans based on industry type and risk profile. The print is far too small for you to read on a screen, so if you are interested, please do download it from the sidebar. What this sets out is what HSE promises to do to help with the industry. And we have three key priorities, and that is to reduce the number of people killed by vehicles and by machinery, to reduce the number of cases from musculoskeletal disorders and occupational lung disease, and for industry to own the challenges and lead on implementing solutions. And this is what WISH does, and this is why we support WISH, to ensure that the guidance that are put out there is by the industry for the industry. So why a campaign? And what exactly do we mean by a campaign? Well, a campaign, it's just a concentrated bunch of inspections, but it's actually far more than that. We publicly told the industry we were coming to do concentrated inspections between October and December 2017. A warning was issued, press releases were issued, e-bulletins were issued. And these went out both before the campaign and during the campaign, showing examples of good and bad practice found, and in particular increasing the amount of media that we would normally use on a particular topic, an industry, by highlighting prosecutions and particular things relevant to the industry during that period. There was also a measures survey. Some of you may have been contacted. It was run by an independent company for HSE across all industries, not just waste and recycling, but it did ask additional questions of those in the industry about whether they'd had an inspection and their views towards it. And we are waiting on that data for further analysis. But as I said, inspections were concentrated within that time period, But life still goes on, and there was also investigations and prosecutions in the industry during that period. And why it's a campaign and not just inspections, why we build in the communications, is to reach those places that we don't inspect. The communication activity actually amplified the operational activity by 20%. And that's why I was pleased to say about whether people were aware of the campaign, because what we actually found on the inspections was 1 in 5 duty holders were prepared and knew that the campaign was happening. But let's talk about those inspections. 613 inspections occurred in that 3-month period. Overall, about 1,000 inspections of waste and recycling sites and activities were carried out over the period of the work year. So you can see that the concentration was in that 3-month period. It's a shame to say that actually 48% of sites that were inspected had uncontrolled risks and resulted in notices of contraventions. Quite often we get asked whether a particular subsector of the industry is worse than another, but actually those with uncontrolled risks were across the sector and not concentrated in a particular one. So, and also 377 notices were served during that 3-month period. Out of that 377 notices, 71 were prohibition notices, where the risk was that great that the inspector had to stop the activity then and there. 305 were improvement notices, and we did actually find one premises without employer's liability compulsory insurance, and a notice was issued for that. The top 3 topics that notices were served on was transport, machinery, and welfare. Now, it's no surprise that it was transport machinery. They are the 2 topics that the campaign was focused on trying to improve standards and reduce risks. So out of all notices served, 35% on transport, 25% on machinery, and then the next highest topic was welfare at 8%. And it's shocking to say that in this day and age, 24 sites visited had inadequate welfare facilities requiring notices. That means they didn't have access to decent toilet facilities, or they didn't have hot running water to wash their hands. So before we move on to look at the key topics in detail, I do believe that it's now question for the audience time.
Yes, it is, Sian. Thank you very much. And the question that we have for you is, if you run a waste and or recycling facility or a site, did you receive an inspection? So again, it's a simple yes or no. So I'll just give you a few seconds there to respond to that question there. Okay then, so we'll have a look at the answers now then. And 75% of people, that's the majority of the people, did not have an inspection. So so there we are. I'll punch back over to you then, Sian.
Okay, thank you. I hope the 25% of you who did are sitting there thinking, whew, that wasn't my site she's talking about. So let's have a look at the key topics. Transport. As I said, transport is the main factor in fatalities in the industry, where people are hit by moving vehicles. And notices were served as a combination of prohibition notices and improvement notices. Prohibition notices served on the actual use of the site, which I'll explain in a bit more detail, and some on the vehicles itself. Now, as a HSE inspector, we look at 3 things when it comes to controlling transport risks. You look at whether the site is safe. Has pedestrians been segregated from vehicles? And pedestrians doesn't mean customers and vehicles, it means your workers, people who are walking around the site. Is there safe passage for them around that site? Safe driver, is your driver properly trained? Can they see properly? That might sound a bit cheeky, but we have known instances where drivers have such restricted visibility that they're not allowed to drive a car, but they still turn up to work to drive your vehicles around your waste site. And vehicle, is your vehicle in good condition? Is it maintained? Has it had a thorough examination if it needs one? And as you see, that was the highest area of notices within the area, within transport action taken, because vehicles were in a very poor state of repair. With regard to prohibition notices being served for site, this is an example of what an inspector found. This is somebody totting in extremely close proximity to vehicles. This is a site that has not been segregated, and in this case the inspector served a prohibition notice to stop totting until such time as safe refuges were provided. There is detailed guidance. If you look at the handout that Toni referred to with the WISH guidance, it's waste 18, hand sorting of recyclables with vehicle assistance, is where you can find the appropriate guidance as to what standards are required. This is not the standard required. And just in case you're thinking well, this is a one-off, here's another site that the same circumstances were found. In fact, all 5 prohibition notices served during the campaign were for totters working right next to vehicles. So it is not a one-off. Now, during this Q3 campaign, we also had a number of prosecutions on transport-related injuries. Now, these occurred obviously not within the quarter we're talking about, October to December 2017, but they fortuitously came to court and hence had a lot of publicity tying it back to the campaign and the inspections we were doing at the time. These have all been pretty well advertised and reported upon in the media, so I'm sure they shouldn't be any surprises. If you want further details, they are contained within press releases on the HSE website. But let me just say what they all have in common is transport hitting people. Savannah Rags, 89-year-old worker fatally injured by a reversing delivery vehicle. No measures in place to adequately segregate pedestrians from moving vehicles. The Jack Moody prosecution, a worker was hit by a shovel loader on a recycling site. He was fortunate not to die, but he has lost both his legs as they were amputated below the knees. United Grab, a worker died after being struck by a reversing telehandler. And Country Style Recycling, a 34-year-old worker suffered life-threatening head injuries when hit on the head by a telehandler boom. These people should not have been anywhere near vehicles. The site should have been appropriately segregated to prevent that. So the other main topic is machinery, which I will go back one. Machinery guarding and also machinery isolation. So as you can see, a range of notices, both prohibition notices and machinery isolation notices. So let's have a look at some examples of what inspectors found whilst out on site. This photo, if you look closely, shows unsuitable guarding around the end of a conveyor. The conveyor was an outfeed from a large baler and wrapping machine being used to wrap large bales of waste. Access could be gained to the pinch point at the end of the conveyor by reaching over the guarding and under the guarding and even through, I'm sorry, I'm getting carried away here, even through, it will change, there we are, even through a gap in the guarding. That is a close-up of the previous photo we got there in the end. Sorry about that, everyone. And this is showing how access could be gained to the pinch point by reaching through the gap in the guarding. Now, actually, this company where the inspector found this is in the better half of the industry, shall we say. It's a company that has a proactive management system and, you know, has staff that deal exclusively with safety. It's not your sort of backstreet business. So anybody, my message is, can make a mistake. cannot look at things as somebody coming in with a fresh pair of eyes would. So do take the time to check your machinery and think, can somebody get their hands in there? Another example, at first sight, this is a photograph showing guarding around a maintenance platform located next to a large baler. Access to the platform was properly controlled by an interlock to prevent the machine from operating when access was needed to the platform. However, somebody had fitted a ladder to the platform and the duty holder had failed to recognise that the ladder could be used to gain access over the top of the gate so that the machine could be operated whilst accessing the platform. They hadn't thought about it, and when pointed out, were absolutely horrified and took the ladder away immediately. So sometimes you need to look a bit closer than first glances. Now, with regard to prosecutions in this quarter, there were three high-profile cases, which I will talk to you about now. Mercy and Recycling Limited, an employee was undertaking routine maintenance work inside a conveyor which led to a hopper. And unfortunately, because the conveyor wasn't isolated, somebody switched it back on and he shot along the conveyor and down through the hopper, falling 4 meters to the floor, and he is now paralysed for life. Mid-UK Recycling in 2013, a worker lost his life whilst cleaning near a conveyor. The recycling line was started up and the worker was drawn onto the conveyor along the line through a trommel and into an industrial waste shredder. There had been a fixed gate that fenced the area off and prevented access in this area, but it had been removed for a number of weeks so workers could freely gain access and management was aware that the gate was not in place. And Clark Technologies, a worker's arm was amputated in a plastics recycling washing plant because it wasn't isolated. And in this case, the director was prosecuted and received a suspended prison sentence. There is WISH guidance about machinery guarding and in particular the lock-off advice for recycling material. And again, that's on the handout that Toni referred to earlier. My next question to you all is, do you actually know what your workers are doing? If you use CCTV to spy on your workers, to monitor your workers, are you actually using that work? Using that CCTV footage to see what they are doing? This is a worker using a conveyor to access another part of the plant. If action had been taken when the CCTV footage was first seen, he might not have suffered his subsequent accident. So they are the two main topics, machinery and transport, that we looked at in the campaign. But as I mentioned, there were other issues found where risks were not being controlled: welfare, stability of structures and materials, electrical safety, lifting equipment not being maintained or examined, falls from height, cosh and desire. So let's look at some of the other prosecutions that occurred in that quarter. One is plasterboard recycling solutions. This is unusual in terms of it's a proactive inspection. That means nobody was injured, nobody was hurt. But when the inspection was carried out there by HSE, there was unsafe transport, unsafe machinery, unstable stockpiles, dust exposure from plasterboard, 20 times the legal limit. And in this case, HSE initiated a prosecution straight away for these failings because it was so bad. And the company was fined £60,000. A much greater fine was against Green North East Trading, Bidco Limited, regarding an electric shock. In this case, they were prosecuted after a contractor cut through a live cable whilst dismantling some equipment at waste and recycling site. He cut a cable he had been told was isolated. The electrical installation at this plant was in poor repair and there was no electrical drawings to know which piece of equipment was connected to what. The company had failed to adequately plan and manage the work carried out by the contractors who were removing the equipment, and after the accident it was found that there was actually several pieces of equipment that had not been electrically isolated. This was a significant failing and could have resulted in the death of one or more of the contractors on the site. And this is also an example of the type of tweets that our communications department was sending out during the period. Welfare, before and after, what a difference. And actually the duty holder, when he was first told to clean up his act, if you like, clean up his toilet, was very reluctant and didn't see the need. But actually after he had done this, he provided the feedback that said his lads were extremely positive and say it is so much better now. And similarly, the kitchen area, again, you know, poor standards, radically cleaned. Basically, the message, it doesn't matter that we work in a waste and recycling industry. You should expect the same standards of welfare as a worker in any other industry, possibly even more so with the risks from exposure to organic matter and other materials. Stability, well, this was actually raised as a concern to HSE, which I'm sure will come to no surprise. There was only just enough room for a lorry to reverse in and be loaded or unloaded, and just enough room for a grab to be situated to load and unload the scrap piles. Fortunately for the owner, he had already begun clearing away some of the items and promised to faithfully do even more that day. The inspector did return the next day and the pile had been substantially reduced and the large bays of concrete and steel for the new piling and storing of material had started to be constructed. It's still time spent dealing with the material risk and there were notices of contravention served, but a positive outcome. So my question is this a supporting wall? Do you think it is? Do you know it is? And what action would you take if you suddenly found out it was? Let's not forget the 5 men who died in Birmingham in July 2016 from a wall collapse. If you have walls on your premises, you need to know whether or not they are load-bearing walls or they are just there to segregate. And if they're just for segregation, they're not load-bearing and that wall will eventually collapse. There we are. This is a nice little petrol retrieval piece of equipment that was found on an inspection during the campaign. The firm were using a pump designed for 2-stroke oil and non-corrosive liquid. The manufacturer confirmed that this was not at all suitable for petrol retrieval because it's all plastic and there's no earth in. A prohibition notice was served to stop this site using it. And again, there is detailed guidance on the safe recovery of petrol from end-of-life vehicles, and that's waste 10 on your handout. So in summary, there were 613 inspections over 3 months. 48% of sites weren't fully managing the risks, and during that period, there were also another 5 industry-related fatalities, 2 involving people being hit by vehicles, 2 being crushed in balers because they weren't isolated, and finally, Toni mentioned the work with people in bins. A member of public was found in the bin. Prosecutions, I've mentioned a good sample of them that took place during that 3-month period, with fines exceeding £3 million in total. And we also continuously provided media articles and Twitter questions. Speaking of questions, one for the audience.
Thank you, Sian. So what topic will you address after today's Health and Safety Executive presentation? So just some broad, rather than specific questions, just a category of subjects that you wish to raise with Health and Safety Executive, and you can choose all that apply. So don't feel that you're just limited to one answer. Although if you do have an extra theme that you'd like to raise, then you can type that in your question box as well. So I'll give you a few more seconds to complete that question there. So which topic would you address after today's presentation? Machinery and lifting equipment, welfare, or COSH or DESIR regs, transport, or another question which you can add in your question box. Okay, so let's see what's the hot topic at the moment. And there we are. See, there's a lot of people that have responded mainly to transport, Sian.
Yeah, and that's very good to hear, because it only takes a new delivery driver or new worker to not, if they don't fully understand the way that the site's laid out, to make that difference. So I'm really pleased to hear that. Even if you go back and review and think, you know what, we are doing everything, that's great, but just review it and keep on top of it. So thank you, everybody. So what next? Well, more of the same. We're going to do our campaign all over again this year between October and December 2018. We're still going to be concentrating on transport and machinery, because last year's campaign taught us that the risks are not being controlled. We are also, from a health perspective, going to visit catalytic converter decanning sites to look at how they are controlling the risks of exposure to RCF to the workers. We will also be doing evaluation visits. So you may have had a visit last year and you were good. Well, we might come back to check you're still being good this year, because we need to make sure that there is sustained compliance within companies. We do hear examples of sites who think, well, I was visited last year, so I've got at least 3-4 years before they'll come back again. That's why we're doing an evaluation visit. And we will be visiting all types and all sizes of sites. So, finally, do you have any questions?
Right, well, thank you very much for that, Sian, and that's given people some time there as well to put their houses in order, hasn't it, for October and December for their potential inspection. That's very good. So we do have a few questions here as well. We've got one. So I'll start off with, this could be for you or Toni to answer really, but is there any work being done to give best practice on communicating health and safety issues to the public? So, you know, just to raise awareness to people that are walking around vehicles, you know, for example, waste collection vehicles when they're out on their rounds and things like that. So is there any work that health and safety or WISH are doing there?
I think the best example of that is that BIFA have a campaign called Drops, Driving Recklessly on Pavements, and this is about educating the public to be safe in their cars whilst driving around refuse collection vehicles. And they have videos that's available on YouTube to watch, and they have used this working in conjunction with the police, and this is supported by WISH as well, to get the message across to members of the public. Toni, I don't know if you've got another example you want to raise.
No, I think that's most definitely the highest profile one that we have got going, because there is a real issue with collection workers being struck by members of the public as they try to get around. So that's most certainly the largest campaign. Perhaps to some extent also the People in Bins campaign over, you know, encouraging people not to get into bins to sleep, or on a night out, or if they're homeless or whatever. So they're the two main ones, I think.
Yes, I know I've put the Drops campaign onto News Online for CIWM members as well on a few occasions. So raising awareness and that it's an enforceable offence, you know. So I think they've been reported as well, the people that drive on the pavements and things. So. So we have another question. The small players in the sector seem to be the ones that are further behind in promoting good health and safety standards. Is there a plan for WISH to try and reach out to these operators, or probably even health and safety executive as well? So I don't know whether Toni, you want to take that question first, or or Sian?
Yeah.
I'll jump in,
go on.
Toni, shall I?
Yeah, go on.
Because WISH has a subgroup dealing, as Toni mentioned in her slide, looking at SME businesses. And in fact, I sit on that group with a cross section of the industry. And one of the things we're looking at this year is running a SHAD, a Safety Health Awareness Day, especially for SMEs in the south of England. It's in the planning stage at the moment. But yeah, that in itself is to provide practical guidance to small businesses.
Hey, Toni, did you want to add anything to that?
That was exactly what I was going to say.
Good. Okay, then also we've had another question as well. With the totters that are on sites and many on transfer stations, are there any specific guidance documents that would refer to them to help them to stay safe?
Yes, I mean, the first thing to say is totters are not banned. You will find totters on most sites. What we're talking about is making sure that they have safe refuges for when the vehicles actually have to approach the area in which they work in, and that's what's been prohibited. Is the lack of the totters have been prohibited because of the lack of safe refuges for somewhere for them to stand when the machinery has to come in. There is detailed guidance. It's WISH 18. Hand sorting of recyclables, totting with vehicle assistance, which is free to download from the WISH website.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that one. And can we see a list of companies that have been prosecuted? I'm not sure whether this question is referring to from the campaign or just in general. So is there a list of companies that you've prosecuted?
Yes, HSE has on our website, we have an enforcement database area where you can see which companies have received enforcement notices and which companies have been prosecuted. And obviously those that were prosecuted within the Q3 campaign are the ones I've mentioned today.
Okay, thank you for that. If we've got any more questions coming through as well, I just wanted to, we had a list of things that were coming through, that for WISH to look at, and we've had a few responses to that as well. There was somebody who would like some guidance on bioaerosols. Toni, is there
well, they'll be pleased to know that it's an advanced draft, and we hope to be releasing that very shortly, or certainly this year anyhow.
That's great to be having that out soon. So that's going through the finalisation process now.
Well, it's being drafted now under the auspices of the Healthier Work Group. There's been a few meetings. We've got a full draft. So it'll obviously need to go through some consultation, but we hope that it will. Well, I'm certain that it will be released during 2018.
Okay, that's good. And we've also had a couple of other ideas as well with dust exposure. And
yeah, interestingly, we've had a lot of queries over the last year on dust and particulates, particularly for street cleansing, where street cleansers might be subject to local traffic and particulate concentrations, which obviously then falls under their workplace. So yeah, dust is something that we are looking at the moment. Is very likely going to be a little subgroup in the Healthier Work Group to specifically address that issue.
Okay then, and also there's one for best practice for site visitors as well. And more insurance markets and insurable risks. So that's another couple of ideas to look at there as well. We've also got another question. Items are signposted on the WISH. Oh, hang on. So here we go. How will Health and Safety Executive be identifying the catalytic converter decanning sites for the October to December 2018 campaign? And will you be liaising with other regulators such as the Environment Agency?
The simple answer is yes, we work very closely with the Environment Agency, National Resources Wales and SEPA in Scotland, and exchange information about permitted sites and things that, so for example, when you saw the slide of the unstable pile of scrap, that was actually a joint visit with Environment Agency and HSE. So the simple answer is yes, we work closely with EA to get the data.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and thank you for everybody for listening. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. Don't forget to respond to the questionnaire, your email, when you receive it, when you finish the webinar. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much, Sian and Toni, for your time today.
Thanks for asking me. That's great.
Thank you.
Bye.